Hello, everyone, and welcome to our listeners and our viewers to another episode of The Edge. Again, we have a very special guest on today. Roy Chua is joining us today. Roy is somebody that I met when I was at a conference in Paris, so it seems very, very strange that I'm from the UK and you're from the west coast of America and we meet in France. But we had a great conversation. We talked about all things SASE and Zero Trust, and I thought it was really useful. I was really excited by your background. So really, I guess the first question that I ask everybody is, tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us how you got to where you are today.
Yep, sure. Well, thank you, Jay, and thank you, John. Really appreciate it. And yeah, it was an interesting meeting in Paris to meet someone who was into zero trust and security, and beyond just SD-WAN and SASE. And so I run a small research and analyst firm called AvidThink. We used to be part of SDX Central, a media company that I co-founded back in 2012, and we grew a research team inside in 2018. We split the company into two parts, and some people call it the light reading, heavy reading thing, and it's kind of like that. So the research arm was spun off as an independent company, and then STX Central was primarily just media. And so run a small team of analysts, and we focus on what I call infrastructure technology, so infratech, anything that's sort of above that sort of the physical network layer all the way up to the underlying infrastructure that supports applications. So we don't do the database and application stuff, but that middle layer, especially around the networking security element as well, that's an area that we typically focus on. And how I got to SDX Central from a media company was, prior to that, my former co-founder and I were doing management consulting. And SDX Central was originally meant to be a lead generation device for the consulting business. And then it grew into something quite different. And how we both got to consulting, we had both started companies that unfortunately, due to various reasons, couldn't continue. So he had a company in sort of cloud networking, and I had a company prior to that, actually in the identity space. And so it was a company called ID Engines, Identity Engines, and that one I founded in 2004, and we wrapped it up in 2008 after the Lehman Brothers crash. I couldn't raise the Series C. We had raised 26 million until that point. Lightspeed, Trinity, and a couple of other venture companies. But in 2008, because we were not profitable, didn't matter that you had 130 customers, didn't matter that you had a whole bunch of brand name customers, you still were shut down because that was the reality then. So that was unfortunate, but that was my sort of zero trust company before zero trust, if you will. And the assets actually had a good life. They went on to Nortel, which then went bankrupt. Subsequently was bought by Avaya. And so Identity Engines became Nortel ID Engines. And then it became Avaya Identity Engines. And the product was sold all this time, right? So it was making revenue. And I talked to the VP of products over at Avaya. They were pretty happy with it. We had over-engineered it. It was premature. We had over-engineered it, overbuilt it. So obviously the product kept going and did a good job. And then eventually Extreme bought it. It became Extreme ID Engines. Product line. So the product had a good run. Unfortunately, we didn't get anything out of it just because of the way it worked. But I'm pretty proud of the product, and it was ahead of its time. But that was my dabbling with zero trust, network access control, and the like. And prior to that, long history of running product management, running marketing, and started my career writing ATM firmware and the network ATM, synchronous transfer mode, at Cisco. On a router targeted, the interface card was targeted at the European and Japanese market. It was the J2E2 interface, and I did the ATM firmware to bring up the card on a Cisco ATM interface processor on a Cisco 7000 router back in the mid-90s. So that's how I got here, which is not what I would expect, but I am here.
Man, that Cisco 7000 router had a long life, didn't it? I think
it did.
It's probably still out there and still running in some telco instances.
No, it did. Cisco had a few platforms that lived a long life. Yeah. The 7000 series was a really good one. The Catalyst
6500, that was a huge one. I
think, God, so to speak, right? That thing has a huge impact, and it still exists out there in the real world. That was an amazing time.
I think back in the day we had two 7200s. I bought them off eBay, I believe.
and or it was the third is the gray market, but they were solid. Cisco supported them, so on and so forth. And then obviously the 6500, we had a bunch of those as well. So solid products. So sounds like you're in the analyst space, and we're seeing this transition right now. I think we're into year 3 of SASE. Gartner came out with it in 2019. Give us some perspective on where the marketplace is, because it is constantly evolving. When we started in 2019, we still had a lot of these SD-WAN startups trying to make the transition. Many of them, like CloudGenix and VeloCloud and so on and so forth. Silver Peak got bought by the big fish. And now we're seeing another round of consolidation in the marketplace. A recent announcement around HPE and Juniper. So can you give us some perspective on what inning are we at in this journey to SASE, and where do you see it going?
Yeah, so I think, in terms of the SASE market, I think where we're at is we're in the process. I would say we're sort of midlife in terms of consolidation of all the services. I mean, in my view, SASE is an umbrella term, right? It's basically an umbrella that captures all those edge boxes that we used to have under one umbrella, right? And whether it was a networking box or a security box, I think Gartner's right in the consolidation and convergence between networking and security. So I think that part is right on. I think it's a convenient umbrella term that collects all these different vendors under one umbrella for the purposes of discussion, for the purposes of a Magic Quadrant, right, and the like. I think where it does a disservice to the industry is the complexity that we've added as a result of that, and putting this umbrella term out there and saying this is the goal you got to get to. And now with all the vendors, like I said, I think we're sort of midlife in terms of trying to pull all these functions into one. To check the boxes, right? In many cases, because the customers don't always know better. Even the ones who know better are happy to check the boxes. It doesn't mean you actually need all of that, and it doesn't mean you actually need all of that in one platform. And the reality is what we're chasing in terms of, check the most boxes, and he who has the most boxes wins, right? I think that is not the right approach long term. But from a let's follow Gartner, let's look at SASE. I think we're sort of mid-journey. What I expect is, as we always see, as you get to about the 75% point, suddenly a new category comes up, and then we jump, right? So you're in baseball. Well, now you're going to be in, I don't know, tennis, right? Or whatever it is, right? The next category. And now you're going to start again, right? The 25% mark or the 10% mark, and you chase the next thing. And that's the reality, right? We had NG firewalls, UTM, right? And then we had SD-WAN, which put in different elements. Then we had secure SD-WAN, SDN 1.0, 2.0, right? And then all of a sudden you have SASE. Wait, SASE, we went too far. Let's come back. Let's add SSE and split that. So we have this journey that we've been on, right, for a long time. And I think before the day is done, we'll have a new category, right? Whatever it's called, right? I don't know what it's called. Zero trust NAS, secure NAS, whatever, right? We'll be jumping to that next category again. But a couple of things I think will happen, which is convergence, I think is real. Convergence of networking and security, I think that's real. I think the desire by the enterprises to have an end-to-end view that protects the user regardless of where they are, whether you're on mobile, at home, in the branch, on campus, I think that part is real. There's a desire from the enterprise side that need is real. So I think there are some elements that will carry through across those things. Now, in terms of the functionality, right? Do I need DLP, RBI, SWG, right? Everything, right? I don't know if we'll call it that as we migrate there. I think the fundamental capabilities are going to be there. I would like to see a convergence so you're not trying to check all these boxes with legacy features, and instead say, as a customer, what I really need protection from this class of malware, this class of attacks, this class of whatever it is, identity, authentication challenges. And does your product give me that or not? Right? I think that's hopefully where we'll get to. That's my hope anyway.
No, that's pretty insightful there. Because yeah, I would agree with you in terms of SASE. We're bringing a category of what are considered past technologies. You mentioned SWIG, you mentioned CASB, so on and so forth. I think more so, and hopefully I think Jay agrees with this, is it's really about embedding zero trust into networking or bringing security into networking. Because at the end of the day, what we did in the past was we focused on speed. Networking applications data resided in a private data center. That's where it lived. And then cloud came around, SaaS came around. That model no longer worked. So we kind of had to go back and embed security into it. So I think we're running into an area where it's about zero trust at the edge. And that at the end of the day, it's really what SASE is about. So maybe we'll see the categories or the technologies that make up the SASE matrix change.
Yeah, I've always felt that, and I've said this before, that for me, SASE kind of came around in 2019, and then SSE kind of it got split, and they added SSE in 2021 because the world had changed. But I always felt that it really concentrated on the remote worker, and certainly SSE felt like it was all about the remote worker. And I know Gartner, and you alluded to it just now, that Gartner are now talking about universal ZTNA, bringing it on campus, and I think that's a good idea. I from when I put my kind of customer hat on, I want my users to have the same policy, whether they're external or internal. Why should it be any different? Why should I have different tools? Why should I have to look different places if we're potentially compromised? Or why should the user experience be different? So for me, that consolidation is pretty critical. And I totally agree with you, what you said about we kind of jump. We have different technologies and different buzzwords and different architectures that come about. And the cloud took quite a long time to actually start getting embedded. And then obviously the pandemic came along and things sped up a little bit. But I definitely think zero trust has a way to go before people fully understand it. But I guess the question I've got for you, being that obviously I met you in Paris and you've traveled the globe. Do you see that SASE is understood more in the west side of America, say in the San Francisco and the Valley area, than it is in the rest of the globe? I know, like I said, we met in Paris, we were at a SASE summit, but a lot of the questions I certainly received there were people asking, what is it? What does it do? What is SSE? How is it going to help me? I just wondered what you're seeing as an analyst in the industry. Are you seeing people understanding it more than they did?
I think what I'm seeing is, so I think you make a very astute point there, which is that when you're sort of in the trenches with technology, and we live SASE and SD-WAN every day, we assume that everyone else in the world is right there, and you're absolutely right. The reality is, as we're splitting all these little differences, SSE, SASE, SD-WAN, no, this is not that, and all that. Customers don't actually care what it is. Right? Customers they have a problem they want solved. And so you're right that SASE as a term is well understood by technologists. SASE as a term is well understood by the tier 1 carriers who are looking to offer it to the customers, and the Fortune 500, no problem. SASE is not understood by a lot of the SMEs, small, medium enterprises. They're not as well. SASE and and SSE particularly is not well understood, and the delineation between SSE and SASE, I would say, is not. I mean, a lot of people don't get it outside of the sort of the Western markets, right? And that is the reality. A lot of them are coming up to speed on SD-WAN, which the carriers are telling to offer. To say, oh yeah, because I have remote offices, I have multiple locations, I need robust links. Is what they're looking for. Robust links, right? I want robust links. I want cheaper links. I want more bandwidth at a lower price. I need a quality of service so that the people there can Zoom or do Teams or whatever it is. So they're just coming up to speed on that. And all of a sudden you throw SASE and SSE, and they look at that umbrella term and all those things are like, what is this, right? They know antivirus, they know anti-malware, right? Right? But they look at the whole thing and they're like, oh my God, right? So yeah, we push the envelope, but then the people who actually follow behind us, as we're pushing the envelope, are not that many. And then the rest of them are sort of left, I just want a next generation firewall, right? I want a firewall, maybe SD-WAN because I need robust links. So there is the reality out there, which is the vast majority of the companies, enterprises out there are not able to understand or consume or appreciate all these things that we're doing. A lot of them will buy from their existing managed providers, their carriers, and they expect that to be baked in, or that, of course, if I buy something from my carrier and I buy a security package, I'm protected, right? If I buy AV or some kind of malware solution on my laptops and desktop, they all know enough to do that and protected, right? And that's about the extent of what they care about and know, right? That's so yeah. As I go around, it's you have to explain SSE, and when you're trying to explain SSE, you realize, wait, like that's a little too esoteric and too complicated. I don't know if they actually need all that, right?
Well, I also think that the industry itself and the vendors have not done themselves a good job of explaining what SASE is. I think you ask one vendor and they come from the perspective of their product line. Maybe it's Swig because that's where they started, or maybe it's CASB because that's where they started. Maybe it's firewalling because that's their lineage. Maybe it's networking because, that's what they've done for 30 years. And they just kind of try to morph whatever they have for their offering. They bundle it together, morph it, and then market it based on that. So, if you're a network leader, a VP of infrastructure, and you're trying to, disconcern what that product does, it's confusing. Because one vendor says, hey, start here. The next one, he walks into the room, hey, start with, DLP. The next one comes in, start with SD-WAN. It's just confusing. And they can't even describe what SASE means to them. I was watching a YouTube video last night where a product manager was on describe, and they got asked from somebody in the crowd, what does SASE mean to you particularly? And it was word salad. It was just a bunch of buzzwords. And then they got called out on it. They backed up, more word salad. It's just crazy. I probably have a job for life because I can get down to the point and really kind of explain what SASE is, what it isn't, and do it in very basic terms. That's all I do is just go on stage very simply in 20 minutes, explain it. It's an application delivery mechanism with security. That's all it is.
No, I hear you. I have one slide. Actually, I laugh because so John, I have a slide and it's just in the middle. It's like, enterprise networking or security nirvana. And then there's like these circles all around it. And it sort of pointed to that. And it's like, are you a networking company? Are you a DLP company? Are you a Swig company? And did you come from the Wi-Fi space, right? Whatever it is, right? And they all point to this nirvana. And how you get there, the journey, it defines what you define as SASE, because that's your view and you want to sell your product. So yeah, I have one slide actually that I've used in Paris, actually, no less, that shows exactly that. And yeah, I mean, from a vendor perspective, you sort of understand where they come from, right? Because as a product manager, you have to position to sell your product as you're trying to get to what the enterprises read from Gartner or the other analysts. Like, this is where you want to be, and you are here. Well, I got to show you how to get from here to there, and that part better involve me because I need to make more money, right? So that's the reality. But you're right, we don't do it ourselves. I mean, that desire to benefit themselves actually does the opposite, which is we all then confuse the customer. So they sit there and they say, well, I don't know what I need. And these things are not cheap. And I'm not sure I want to commit, right? So they sit there and they say, okay, you know what? I'll just wait for my carrier, for my MSP to show up and provide me with whatever they think is best. And I'll just wait till then. But yeah, it's not good.
I mean, you said it just a few minutes ago that people tick features. And certainly when I have conversations, and I know John's the same, I don't talk about features because I talk about use cases. I talk about actual problems. I talk about what is it you are having issues with that you are trying to resolve. Because it may well be that somebody says, I need DLP, I need CASB, I need this, I need that. And it's like, okay, but what is the actual problem you're trying to resolve? Because you may not need full functioning CASB or full functioning DLP. And the problem is customers do get swayed by vendors And as John said, each vendor is going to give them their list of features and say, go and ask the other vendor if they've got this feature. Nobody actually generally sits with the customer and says, what is your problem? Let's look at what features you need and how much you need them.
Right.
And I mean, and it's getting even more convoluted. I mean, with zero trust, it's everywhere now, right? So for me, SSE and SASE sit on top of zero trust. It's now an executive order, and I believe it is being adjusted. Another one's coming out soon. It's part of the NIS2 regulation. It's part of a lot of other things.
It is.
Do you see in that drive more conversations?
I see more confusion, right? So you are correct, right? In the US, right, this has 802.207, right? That's part of the ZT architecture. And you are correct. The administration has mandated that zero trust principles, and obviously they'll point back at NIST, adopted by all agencies, I think this year, 2024. And so that's great, right? That's good, makes you more secure, except I don't think they actually fully understand what zero trust is and how to actually apply. The application of zero trust is actually, we all know this, it's very hard to get zero trust throughout. And a lot of them don't know where to start. I mean, even back in 04, 05, when we first did it, and we didn't call it zero trust then, but it was sort of the deperimeterized network, or whatever it is when you call it, right? The identity-based networking or deperimeterized network, back from the work that the Jericho Forum did back in the early 2000s. It's really hard because what people need to understand is that identity is a foundation element, because that's what I call the identity is important, because I call it the unit of prosecution. In other words, if you can tie to a person, right, and there's wrongdoing, right, that's why identity is important, because that's where the laws come from, right? It's the unit of prosecution. And so identity is critical. The policies are critical. What's your set of policies? And then the set of resources, which require an inventory catalog of what you actually have. And the reality is a lot of companies don't have a handle around any of those elements, right? And they don't have a good handle around identity, which is getting better now. You have your directory services and the like, right? And it's getting more consolidated, which is both good and bad. But the set of policies are not well fully understood. If you have compliance, maybe, because it's more explicit. But if you have other kind of policies that are more company, corporate specific, organization specific, they're not always as detailed as, say, a PCI standard or whatever it is, right? And then finally, resources, inventory of catalogs and resources of what resources are you actually using. That's horrendous, right? Especially now, with all your SaaS services that everyone subscribes to and Shadow IT, that's very hard to get a handle on. And so people say, yeah, we want to do zero trust. I'm like, well, yeah, sure. Do you know the foundations? Do you actually understand what is involved in getting zero trust done? And do you know that it's going to be a pain in the ass if you don't apply it properly? And you're going to have productivity issues, meaning people will get locked out, right, unnecessarily, right? And so I think not everyone grasps that, but that shouldn't stop people from thinking through it and getting started on it, because it is necessary, and it is probably the only way going forward to ensure some kind of security around your systems, right, in a sustainable, scalable way. So, but yeah, I've had conversations, and they realize it, and some of the reactions like, yeah, we just pretend we have zero trust and then everything is good, we're complying with NIST, right? So that's one. The other one is they actually understand what they have to do, and they're like, oh my God, I don't know where to start. I don't know how to deal with this, right? And so you get reactions out of that spectrum. One will just pretend we have zero trust, we'll plaster it, and then we're done, checkbox, right? On the other one that actually understand what it means, like, oh my God, right, where do I start? And I think the goal of, I think our role is to help people pick a middle path to say, there is a starting point, here are the critical assets, here is where you actually have the policies in place and identities in place, and let's start there first, and then grow it from there, right, over time. I think that part, I think, is going to be very important in the next 3 to 5 years, as we try to help the industry actually apply understand zero trust, and then more importantly, actually apply zero trust increasingly, right, over time.
So I think you've pretty much said that the best place to start is where your critical assets are, right?
That's where I would start, from when you triage a network, right? Well, when you triage your assets or IT or whatever it is, you start with where your crown jewels are because that's what you care about. And usually that's where you can get budget to protect, usually. Right. Right. I mean, that's the reality, right? Because they don't have infinite budget. In fact, they have limited budget usually, right? And they have limited resources. And so you start with your crown jewels and then you work your way from there, whatever your crown jewels happen to be as an organization.
We talk quite a lot about this being a journey, that it's not, you can't just say, I'm going to do a zero trust project and off you go. You have to say, this is what I'm going to do stage one. This is then going to lead on to stage two. This is going to lead on to stage three, because I think you can never start a project that's 5 years long and expect in 5 years to still be biting away at that elephant, right? It just doesn't work like that.
Well, the attention span of the corporation is very short. They view life on a quarterly basis, at best on a yearly basis. So if you're looking to do a zero trust program, which is going to take, to Jay's point, 5 years, you've got to really come with a strategic vision, and you've got to hit some home runs right out of the gate in that first inning. What are some areas that you see as, easy wins for somebody looking at a strategic vision for zero trust?
Yeah, so I see, and I think, in terms of the SASE networking element itself, I think, network access controls are a good place, right? So because we already authenticating people coming on the network anyway, regardless, right? And to the extent that you can apply zero trust principles to it, to allow deny them access based on attributes. So make a smarter decision, make a continuous decision, and then provide the amount of segmentation so they only get to what they need to get to, right, for the task at hand. I think that's an easy place to start. And especially I would start with third-party contractors or third-party users as a use case, because that can reduce your risk, dramatically, right? So I think that is a good place to start. That was where we were starting many, many years ago in 04, 05. I don't think it's actually changed. I think the threat landscape is worse, right? But the vector of attacks are very similar. And so I would say that that's where we started. That's where we got traction. And I believe that that's where we can get traction. I am seeing traction as an analyst now, looking at some of the companies that I cover, that actually is getting traction. And the policies there are simpler, especially with third party, right? It's basically lock everything, restrict access, project task-based only, right? And then you grow from there.
And that aligns with what Jay and I have been talking about. I actually wrote an article, Cheat Codes to Zero Trust, I believe it was. And it was third party, using an agentless approach for third party, get out of the gate, quick win, high visibility, and not really from a resource perspective that difficult.
No, agreed. I'm completely in agreement with you that the old SDP stuff that we had, software defined perimeter, and sort of agentless approach, that we've been refining. There is no excuse not to be able to do it right now. The technology is there, and it's actually very painless, as you point out. It's actually very painless, and it's third party contractors, right? And so it's great, right? It's a win for everyone. It's an easy win. Agreed.
I'd be curious to know, like, Jericho Forum were talking about this in the early 2000s, right? You had a company yourself that started this motion. John Kindervad came along and started talking zero trust. Why is it somewhere between 20 and 25 years later that we're actually doing something about it? I mean, you've alluded to it, and I think I know what your answer is going to be, but why do you think it's taken us to 2023, 2024 for us to realize the error of just letting everyone do everything on our network?
Yeah, I mean, the reality, as we found in going to market, was that people actually don't care in general, right? So they care, but they don't, right? In other words, the number one goal of most of the companies that we work with back then, and even now, even today, when I go out and talk to enterprises, the number one goal is to make money, right? It's to not hurt the productivity of the people. I need cyber insurance. And sometimes the way they think about it is that, well, we're all going to get attacked anyway at some point. It's a luck thing, right? It's a probability game, right? And so since it's a probability game, and I need my employees to be productive. And as long as I have cyber insurance, I'm going to count the fact that I won't get attacked, and I'm going to go forward. If I get attacked, I have cybersecurity insurance. As long as I pretend that I'm covering all the bases and I check the boxes at a paper level, I still keep my job. And ideally, if I have an MSSP or MSSP, I can fire them and bring the next one in, and I'll just bring Google Mannion in to do forensics, and then we'll just repeat the game again. But I get to keep my job. Everyone's happy. No one's complaining that I'm blocking them from their work, right? That story, unfortunately, was the same back then, and it's the same now, right? More compliance, more, and the cybersecurity insurers, the governments are mandating and pushing that. So I think it had to come from that side, because otherwise there was no movement, right? It's the same thing. PCI mandates, firewall, IPS, and all that. Without that mandate, do you think the CIOs would have been so, eager to put all those things in? Not necessarily, because of the cost, right? They look at some of the cost center. At least this function, security is a cost center, and that I don't think has changed sufficiently yet. But now, more attacks, people are scared of ransomware, compliance, government. So I think all the factors are now finally coming together. And actually, I think, Jay, you answered that on stage in Paris, right? I asked you, what's changed, right? That will make you think it could be done now, because I've lived this for many, many years, right? And I think you're right. It's the combination of all the factors coming together that are finally allowing us to drive it forward. And now we're talking about, what's the easy use cases? Where do you start from? And we're picking actually use cases and talking about that now, finally. So I am hopeful. I'm hopeful. Yeah.
I think for me, the critical thing is user experience doesn't need to change.
Yeah.
Right. So
that's the point.
The technology is there now. We've got regulations there now. We've got a bunch of other things that are going on. But it's really about what is the effect on the user. And with the technology we have now, I think the effect on the user can be kept to a minimum.
I think that's fair. I think productivity would have been more impacted in the past. Agreed. And I think that's a good point. So I would say, yes, if you look at the work habits today of people versus, say, 20 years ago, right? Your laptop, your services in the cloud, right? You're walking around. What the services you use are pretty much the same, whether you're in the office, at a cafe, or at home, or sitting on the bus or the subway. And so, yes, I think the fact that your use pattern is similar, and that use pattern is amenable to a zero trust control, then I think it does make it easier. And in fact, now I'm seeing a lot more technologies and a lot more offerings where zero trust done right actually could be more convenient, right? For instance, trying to get to your server on a VPC, and you're trying to work on the server, or you're trying to get a private application. If zero trust is done correctly, I don't need to worry about VPNs and all those things. I just say, double click the app or double click the link, and it takes me there in a zero trust manner, right? So it's combination of VPN type capabilities with zero trust embedded and ongoing security, identity verification. So if it's done right, it can actually be more convenient. So I work the same way regardless of where I am. So I think you are right. Technology has improved. I'm using some of these services, been trialing some of these ones, and I have to say it's a lot better than back in the mid 2000s, right? Yeah. So for sure.
I mean, and that's why I think having zero trust or universal ZTNA, having that access no matter where you are from the same policy, from the same tool, is really the next step, because that is, for me, at the moment, users are still using their ZTNA tool at home or on the road or wherever they are, and then they're coming on-prem, and it's different. Things feel different. Things look different. Doing that single policy from anywhere, I think is great. I want to ask you kind of one more question before we get onto the fun stuff. And I'm going to ask you to kind of get out your crystal ball and look into the future. Where do you see zero trust going? And on top of that, SSE and SASE, where do you see them going? What do you think's next?
Yeah, so I see the convergence of these things, not from a acronym perspective, but I see convergence into more of a universal, I think we're getting to a universal fabric, converged security network fabric that connects you to the resources that you need, in the right way with the security controls in place in a convenient manner. So I see that. Now, whether you're inspecting my traffic in there, probably you are. Whether you're doing the DLP or you're doing, all the SWIG or whatever it is, right? That content inspection is happening to protect me. I don't know if I want to call it SWIG or DLP or CASB anymore, right? It's just a set of controls because you're doing inspection of the traffic. You do what is needed to keep me secure, right? Under one set of controls. So I expect to see that kind of evolution coming, where there are proxies or clients that sit on your laptop, do your endpoint security, but your email connection goes through them, your whatever it is goes through them, and then they gain access. But not only do they gain access, they also allow you access to create the tunnels behind the scenes that you don't have to worry about. You just name the resource, it'll get you to the resource in the right way, right? And it validates your identity, it validates the posture of your devices, it makes sure that you are who you are, all the time. So I expect to see that kind of architecture going forward. And that same architecture runs whether you're on premises, whether you're on a bus, whether you're traveling. I think the consistency, I think, Jay, that you talked about, it's important. That consistency of policies, that unified policy, I think is important. So I see the vendors converging on that new sort of fabric, if you will, with these attributes. And I think one of the things that you brought out, I think the convenience of that, it's not just the capability of that, the convenience of that is going to be critical. That's a good point. So, yeah.
John, anything from you?
No, I mean, that was one of the better answers I've heard in regards to SASE, Zero Trust, and SSE in terms of where it's going. So 100% agree.
I guess one final question. How long do you think it's going to take?
That's going to take a while.
It's going to take a while. I think 3 to 5 years. I'm seeing some of the early clients out there already from some of the more innovative vendors showing up. I mean, they're not all fully baked yet, right? They're trying to get their way there. So it's probably going to take 18 to 24 months because it is a lot of functionality to try to build in. And what happens with these things is we complexify first. Right? That was my talk. Complexify first. In other words, you got to get it more complex. Then you realize what you don't need. Then you simplify. Right, but you have to complexify first because you're worried that you've left something behind. And we're going to do that. So as we get there, we will end up streamlining. I mean, if you look at all the SaaS applications, right, Figma, Salesforce, whatever it is, usually you build something bigger, and you're like, wait a minute, I don't actually need all these things, right? This task actually only needs this, and then you shrink, right? I think we'll get there. So that's my hope.
That brings up a question in my mind. Do you see that solution coming from the startup space, or do you see it coming from the incumbent vendors? Do you think the incumbent vendors have it in them to decomplexify their portfolios?
They don't have the incentive to, right? We know that. I mean, from history, right? We've worked at enough companies. There's enough experience here that the incentive structure in a larger company makes it very hard. What likely will happen is that the smart large company will be watching, the small one will emerge, and then the moment they show market traction, they'll get eaten, sucked in, and then hopefully the DNA, becomes the core of a larger company, right? That's what I hope will happen in the best case, right? And so that's my expectation. That's why we're watching the small company space, because I think it'll emerge there first, and then if they get traction, the big security vendors will step in and buy them. And then hopefully from there, the world gets better because then everyone copies and makes things easier and better for all of us, right? So that's my hope. But yeah, not from a big company, it's going to be really, really hard. I mean, we know that. All the PMs, all the GMs, they're going to hold tight to what they have. They're measured by growing another 10, 20%, 15% on last year. The fastest way to do that is incremental, evolution of the product line. Right? And market, sell, channel, incentive. That's the way it runs. That's the way the world runs.
This has been great, but I do want to ask you a fun question before you disappear. So
sure. You
don't know me very well, but food is my passion outside of racing cars. And I obviously we met in Paris. I understand you get to travel quite a lot. So What has been the best food experience and where was it? So it doesn't have to be that the food was great, but what's been the best experience and where in the world was it?
Yeah, so there is a default answer where I still think it can't be beat, but then I'm biased. So I'm originally from Singapore. In fact, I'm still a Singapore citizen, right? So I'm a little biased in terms of food quality, food experience. I still go to back home, right? I mean, it doesn't have to be Singapore. You could, Southeast Asia, right? Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand. I think that food, the spices, the richness, that it's hard to beat, right? That part, I think is still hard to beat. Um, um, but I did have a fun experience. Speaking of different but fun, in Paris, actually, there is a ramen place. It's in the Michelin Guide, in a ramen place in Paris, that recreates the experience of a street ramen stall, along with piped in subway sounds. So you actually, yeah, it's real, right? So it's actually sound from the subway in Tokyo being played, and the decorations and everything in there, and they make you sit. It's tight. It squeeze you in. There's a little stall, so it feels like you're on the street in Japan eating ramen, and inside in Paris, and that I thought it was surreal and kind of fun. So that was, I think, a fun experience. Next time in Paris, we can
Next time we're there, but we are going to be over at RSA soon, so I'd love to meet up and grab you dinner.
Let's
And
do that.
I'm sure you can recommend some amazing places.
Sure.
But
No, I look
John,
forward to.
why don't you wrap up with a fun one?
Yeah, so I'm gonna go with Singapore. Chili crab or pepper crab.
Chili crab, Singapore chili crab. Yeah, that is the best. It is the best. I mean, well, not the. I'm sure there's many the best, but that is really, really good. Yes,
It's fun, man. It's a messy meal, but super fun. I actually like the pepper crab better. So
you do. Okay.
Yeah, that was my favorite of the two. So
that's good.
I've had pepper crab, but it was in Cambodia, down on where the in the area where they grow the kampot peppers, right? Kampot.
Nice.
So that was amazing, but I've not had chili crab, so maybe that's.
You got to do the chili crab if you're in Singapore. Chili crab it's got to be on the menu. Got to go down to the beach, have it there. That's the place to go.
Next time.
So Roy, I really want to thank you for coming on. I've had a great chat, very insightful. I will drop you a note, and when myself and John are at RSA, let's go out and maybe we get some chili crab in San Francisco.
Let's do that. I'm not sure it'll be as good, but we can definitely do that. And there's plenty of other food in San Francisco as well.
Oh, there's so much food in San Francisco. Oh my gosh.
I look forward to that.
Ridiculous.
Thank you very much for coming on.
No, you're very welcome. Thank you. Thanks, Jay. Thanks, John. Appreciate it.